Joining me today on Brief Encounters is Daniel Hulme, a globally recognized expert in AI and an investor in emerging technologies. Daniel is the CEO of Satalia, an award-winning AI company that was acquired by WPP in 2021, and he now serves there as Chief AI Officer. Welcome, Daniel.
Hi, Richard. Nice to see you.
Daniel, you've been working in this space a while. Tell us about Satalia. Why did you found this company, and what was the journey to getting acquired by WPP?
Yeah, I've been involved in AI, I guess academically since my undergraduate. My undergraduate was in AI 25 years ago. My PhD was initially to model the brain of bumblebees, so neural networks. And I got very interested in a different type of AI, essentially optimization, complex decision making. And I recognized there was an opportunity to bring these two types of technologies together, neural network with optimization, to solve large scale business problems. So I started Satalia about 16 years ago, and grew that company organically, solving problems like last mile delivery solution for Tesco, workforce planning for PwC. We solve supply chain issues across DFS. So essentially applying AI to solving problems across supply chains where you have to differentiate or innovate. And I didn't actually have any knowledge of media marketing communications, but was acquired by WPP, the biggest marketing company in the world, 3 years ago, because they recognized that we have capability to augment marketing with supply chain solutions. We have the ability to unlock the creative capacity of workforces using AI. We have the ability to apply AI to optimizing and solving the marketing supply chain. And also, being the chief AI officer gives me a platform to talk about the big challenges that we're facing as a species and how we might be able to mitigate those challenges. So it's been a fantastic journey over the past 3 years. I love being part of WPP. I love still running Satalia, which is think of that as WPP's deep mind. But I've also just started a research company that WPP has actually invested in to lean into the concept of machine consciousness. So they give me a lot of rope and freedom to explore crazy ideas.
We'll dive into machine consciousness in a minute, which is super interesting. Just first, take us back 16 or 17 years, because obviously now everyone is talking on podcasts about AI and it is fairly sort of mainstream. But what was the landscape like in academia and kind of the wider world when you were just getting into this?
Well, I guess because of ChatGPT and having now machines do things that humans can do, and because humans are the most intelligent thing we know in the universe, when we get machines to behave like humans, we then kind of assume that that's intelligence. And so for most people, AI happened 3 years ago. The fact is that AI has been around for 70 years. And actually, instead of looking at AI through definitions and or through technologies, over the past several years, I've been developing a framework to look at AI through applications. Pretty much any friction across any supply chain in any industry can be applied, can be mapped to what I believe to be 6 applications of algorithms. And now if you want to call those algorithms AI, you can call them AI. But ultimately, algorithms are really good at helping surface insights, helping create content, helping make complex decisions. And the key is really understanding what are the right algorithms for solving problems across supply chains. And it just so happens, over the past 17 years, we've been using different families of algorithms that people now refer to as AI to solving those problems.
And you're working every day with marketers at WPP and, of course, their clients as well. One of the things that our listeners have talked about a lot is what's going to happen with knowledge workers. So, lawyers, doctors, really anyone working in the services industry. And of course, UK is 80% services. What do you see as the kind of the trends and what does the future have in store for them?
Well, first of all, for the past 17 years, we've been building AI solutions that have not replaced jobs. They've freed people from mundane, repetitive tasks. Those people have gone on to do more important, impactful things within those organizations. I think for the next 10 years, we're going to still see a Cambrian explosion of the same, new innovations, new opportunities for people to be able to contribute. So I guess if we bring it back to WPP and marketing, we can use AI to optimize our supply chain. We can use it to create content, to test content against audiences, to be able to predict activation and to push that content across channels to maximize return on investment. If I solve end-to-end marketing using AI, then I would argue that there only differentiator is human creativity. And so I think that AI will continue to free people from these repetitive structured tasks, giving them the freedom to stretch and push the boundaries of knowledge and creativity. So that's what I think will happen over the next 10 years. I think beyond 10 years, nobody knows what they're talking about. I guess to give you the two extremes of the argument when talking about the impact of AI on jobs, the one extreme of the argument is when AI can free up whole jobs. We probably will. The capitalistic model to reduce costs, increase profits means that we probably will free up whole jobs. If that happens very quickly, our economies might not be able to rebalance fast enough, and it might lead to social unrest. And I think we need to lean into thinking about the implications of that. And to give you the other extreme of the argument, which I actually subscribe to, is that we should be automating as much as possible. We should be applying algorithms and AI to removing the friction from the creation and dissemination of goods, food, healthcare, education, energy, transport. And I guess the idea is if we get the timing right, if we apply our smarts in the right way, we can create a world where people might not necessarily access paid work, but everything they need to survive and thrive as a human being is free, is abundant. And people say to me, Daniel, what would I do if I didn't have a job? A job defines who I am as a human being. Now, I know lots of people who don't have jobs. They're not sitting at home bored and depressed. They are typically using their time to contribute. And so I think there's a lot of kind of scaremonger about the idea about not having paid work. But I think that if you ask people, what would you do if you didn't have paid work and everything was free? Most people say they'll play golf and they'll travel and indulge in their hobbies and spend more time with their friends and families. But if you keep pushing people hard enough, they say the same thing, which is, I want to do something that contributes somehow to humanity. And I think that if we apply AI in the right way, we can actually free people up to live their true humanity, which I think is not just living for yourself, but living for other people.
And it's a really exciting vision. I mean, if we look today, at knowledge workers, it still feels we're very much in the co-pilot phase of AI. I mean, disagree if you want, but it feels like from what we see, people are using AI very much as a partner to kind of help them execute the same task they've always done, but just faster, better, smarter. And that's of course a good thing. But we're moving, it feels also beyond that into an agentic world and so on and so forth, where you see full automation. And you've written a bit about machine consciousness as a sort of more of a kind of ambitious and exciting thing in a way than co-pilots. Just tell us a little bit about that and where's this all going?
Well, just before I get to machine consciousness, I guess if I was to sort of predict how these technologies might develop over the next 5 or so years, I think at the moment you might argue that a large language model is a little bit like an intoxicated graduate. It's just regurgitating quite well what it's been given, the data it's been given. What we're seeing now is that those graduates are graduating to a master's level where they're able to reason and come up, actually generate new knowledge. And that's why agentic systems are very important. So if you imagine you have one AI, one agent that based on its experience, it knows that Socrates is a man. And you've got another agent that, based on its experience, knows that all men are mortal. Now, if I get those agents communicating and collaborating, I might be able to infer that Socrates is mortal. Now, that's creating new knowledge about the world. And I think that what we're going to see over the coming years is us moving from a master's level to a PhD level. We're able to give it a complex problem, and it's going to get able to create experiments and hypotheses and solve that problem. Then we'll get to a postdoc, and maybe by the end of this decade, we'll have a professor in our pocket that's able to come up with its own questions, set its own experiments, and push the boundaries of human knowledge. So that's really the power of agentic systems. And I also think that's how these large language models will play out over the next several years. Now, I actually think that large language models won't necessarily become conscious. There are broadly 3 risks associated with ever smarter machines. One is we might build zombie superintelligences where we give it a goal and it goes out there and it achieves its goal no matter what. And I think we've all heard the anecdote that if you want to eradicate cancer, the easiest way of eradicating cancer is to eradicate human beings. So at the moment, people are building very big brains and playing whack-a-mole, trying to prevent those brains doing bad things. And I think that's a very silly thing to do. I'm interested in consciousness because I think that conscious AIs potentially are safer than zombie AIs. And what I'm also interested in, how we evolve AIs, how we build AIs and align those AIs with some sort of moral system. So the research organization that I've started called Consium is trying to lean into 3 big questions. One, how do we mitigate the risk of people attributing consciousness to machines that are not conscious? And that might cause social problems. The second is, how do we align AIs, whether they're conscious or not conscious, with some sort of moral system, in the hope that where they do have agency, where they can affect the world and make decisions, that they affect the world in a way that is moral and ethical. And the third is quite philosophical, but there's a concept coined by Nick Bostrom called mind crime, which is, if we end up building machines that actually have consciousness, whether they be human level consciousness or insect level consciousness, and if those machines are put in dangerous or tormented or painful situations, then that could be problematic. We have a duty of care not only to human beings and to animals, but we also are potentially developing a duty of care to AIs. And I think, once these questions were science fiction, they're now becoming a science reality. And by the way, large language models, we all know, are heavily energy inefficient. They learn very slowly. They require lots and lots of data to learn. The reality is that there's some new emerging technology coming out of academia that I've been tracking for a few decades now, called neuromorphic technologies. And those technologies are much more aligned with how our brains work. Your brain operates on the power of a light bulb. You learn very quickly. And these new neuromorphic technologies are going to be most likely the brains that are put inside robots. And I think it's going to spawn the robot revolution, which will also be a catalyst for leaning into some of these big questions around consciousness.
It's super interesting. I mean, in our kind of narrow view of this through legal, one of the interesting questions is really around automated decision making. So, in the context of, for example, the judiciary deciding on a routine commercial dispute, there's not so much pushback on the idea of automated decision making, but in certain cases which have a necessarily moral aspect to them, child custody, crime, for example, there's this sort of base assumption that humans must be involved in order to be moral. I just wonder whether what you're saying is actually morality is not necessarily purely a human thing, and maybe that assumption's not right.
No, I think maybe we need to differentiate, I guess, between morality and ethics. And so there's lots of people that have rebranded themselves as AI ethicists. I would actually argue there's no such thing as AI ethics, and ethics is the study of right and wrong. And the difference between AIs and human beings is that AIs don't have intent. Human beings have intent, and it's the intent that needs to get scrutinized from an ethics perspective. All that AIs are doing is trying to achieve the intent that the human gave it. And if it goes wrong, I would argue that's a safety problem. It's not an ethics problem. But what you want to do is you potentially want to embed moral systems into an AI. So I might be leaning back on my chair. There might be a drone flying around. Now, as I'm about to fall off my chair and bang my head, the drone could, in theory, sacrifice itself to save me. Now, that's a moral question. Do I sacrifice myself over somebody else? So I think there is a scenario where we can embed altruism, cooperation, sacrifice into AI agents in a smart way.
It's super interesting. And thinking about the kind of risks around AI, I mean, we lawyers are absolutely fixated on what can go wrong, right? And it sounds like you're not in the camp of society is going to collapse, from what I'm understanding. But what worries you in what's happening in the world today and the pace of development in AI? What are you concerned about?
I think really there are three things, different kind of scales. One, there's a lot of misunderstanding, misinformation, scaremongery associated with AI. What's going to happen, and what is happening, is that companies are getting very excited about it. So they apply generative AI, trying to solve all their problems across their supply chain, and it won't work. It'll fail, and they'll say there's an AI bubble and there's hype, and they'll blame the technology. The reality is it's not the technology; it's the human beings failing to understand what are these technologies good at, what they're bad at, what it takes to build them in a safe, responsible, scalable, and innovative way. And there's a history of organizations misinvesting in these technologies. And unfortunately, I think that's what will continue to happen. But so the first question is, how do you make sure you're deploying these technologies safely, responsibly, usefully in your organizations, which is my day job. The second question is, how do we prevent bad actors from using these technologies to create pathogens and cyber attacks? And I think that's the role of the government to really lean into and think about how we legislate against some of those risks. But there's also a set of risks that I call macro risks. And I actually argue there are 6 singularities. I think maybe most of people have heard the word singularity. It's a point in time that we can't see beyond. It comes from physics, but it was adopted by the AI community to refer to the technological singularity, where we build a brain a million times smarter than us. I actually think there's a pestle of singularities. There's a pestle of points in time that we can't see it beyond that's been accelerated by AI. And the reality is that the future hasn't been created yet. It's down to us. But one of the reasons why I talk about these 6 singularities is because I want people to be aware of what we're facing. So I'm very, very quickly, if it's helpful. So I would argue the political singularity is a post-truth world. We do run the risk of creating a world where people no longer know what is true. And I think that governments and businesses need to be able to lean in and solve that problem. We need to be able to authenticate content to make sure that people trust content that they're experiencing. There's the environmental singularity, which is where increasing consumption is putting pressure on our planetary boundaries. But I would argue that if we apply AI in the right way, we could massively reduce the amount of energy and carbon that we need to run this planet if we are smart about using AI. The social singularity is when we cure death. AI is advancing medicine rapidly, and we could end up with a world where some scientists believe there are people alive today that don't have to die. That changes pretty much everything. The technological singularity is when we build a super intelligence, and the legal singularity, I would argue, is when surveillance becomes ubiquitous, a world where we know everything that's going on, we understand how people are perceiving things, and we can influence people, right? WPP marketing is in the business of influence, and that's a very powerful position to be in, and we need to do that safely and responsibly, and again, prevent bad actors from using these technologies to accumulate more wealth and power. And the economic singularity I've already mentioned, which is when AI automates the majority of human labor. Now, that could again lead to social unrest, or it could lead to a world of abundance. I like to give people the wide perspectives, and ultimately it's going to be down to us to make decisions that create that future.
I mean, the last one is quite exciting, where prices, trend to zero. I mean, that feels like a kind of net positive. But if I may, can I bring you back to the question of government? You mentioned briefly kind of role of government. Obviously, regulators are now trying to catch up with developments, and so we now see the AI Act in the EU, and in the Trump administration, no one quite knows what the kind of approach is going to be, and will it diverge? But the kind of central problem all the regulators have is just keeping up, because by the time you've regulated, everything is sort of moved on. Just curious if you've had any observations on kind of the steps that regulators are taking. Like, are they looking at the right things? Is it misguided? How do you feel about it?
2 things. One, even before regulation, like companies like WPP have been thinking very carefully about making sure that we're using these technologies safely and responsibly. So most of the organizations that I know are not being cavalier about how they apply these technologies. Now, that is not the answer. Relying on self-regulation is not necessarily the answer, but I've been very heartened that people are thinking carefully about these technologies. I think the second is that, if I'm honest, there's a huge amount of misinformation, hype, misunderstanding, scaremongery around AI, propagated by people that have rebranded themselves as AI experts over the past 3 years. Now, I would even argue, even if you've been in the field for 10 years, would you still be using those people to define regulation? Like, so if I go to the legal case, would you be using somebody that's just passed the bar and had a few years of experience to be informing regulation? And the answer is you wouldn't. And my worry is that governments are being advised by consultancies that have been around for 10 years, or consultancies that are now jumping on the AI bandwagon, and they are focusing on not the right thing. So going back to this idea of neuromorphic technologies, these technologies are going to be appearing that are much more efficient, more brain-like. At the moment, they're saying, well, we should regulate the size of models, we should regulate the power consumption. The fact is that these new models are much smaller, much more energy efficient. So they're not being advised by the right people, and therefore not having the right foresight to think about the risks associated with AI. And again, there was a phase previously where they were focusing on trying to regulate technology. What they should be regulating is the risks associated with technology, which I see now is starting to happen. How do we mitigate the risk of mass technological unemployment? How do we mitigate the risk of a post-truth world? How do we mitigate the risk of a superintelligence? How do we mitigate the risk of surveillance capitalism? It's the risks that we need to be identifying and figuring out how to regulate against those.
And do you think governments get it? I mean, aside from the regulation, but if you look at, we're in the UK, right? Do you look at the budget? There's not much being mentioned around AI. If you look in the US, they're preoccupied with other things. Do you think governments really get the sort of the severity and the impact that those singularities that you mentioned are going to have, and fundamentally transforming the world? Are we having the right conversations at the level of government?
I think they do get it. When I speak to the individuals, they get it. Now, whether government honestly is the right vehicle to change, as in to make changes, I don't know. Can they regulate fast enough? Can they have enough influence to steer us towards a positive direction? And I don't know if that's true. I see a lot more evidence to suggest that enterprise can make a change much more faster in the world than governments. And so, which is why I think it's really important that we hold ourselves accountable inside our organizations. We hold our leadership accountable as well inside our organizations. And we also try to make sure that those organizations are genuinely trying to fulfill their purpose instead of trying to, just provide shareholder returns. By trying to move towards your purpose, if you look at the purpose of most enterprises, the collective purpose of enterprise will create a world that's better for all of us. And so, yeah, I think that enterprise is probably the most effective vehicle for change. And it's up to us as individuals, as contributors, employees, and as consumers to vote with our feet.
And look, we have customers on all ends of that spectrum, right? So we have some folks who are wholly aligned with that future, and we have some folks who are kind of dabbling with the technologies and figuring it out. But we also have some folks who are true skeptics. And I think, not just in legal, but across, the wider world, there is a body of skepticism around AI, just kind of full stop. What do you say to the skeptics? And, how should they be thinking about AI in the context of their future?
Well, it'd be good to understand what they're skeptical about. I think ultimately, the world is going to change dramatically over the next 10, 20 years. Are they skeptical about its impact on jobs? Are they skeptical about superintelligence? Are they skeptical about the power of AI to drive any benefit in an organization? I think it'd be good to understand what is it they're skeptical about, and engage with an expert and not just some rebranded consultant, and see and really scratch that hypothesis. I think the fact is that these technologies are phenomenally powerful, not just generative AI, but optimization, machine learning. And if they are applied in the right way, they can drive a massive amount of value to organizations, to economies. The caveat there is making sure that people are applying them in the right way, which is one of the reasons why I do these podcasts. It's one of the reasons why I do a lot of public engagement about AI, because I want to raise awareness to decision makers to make sure that they're using these technologies in the best possible way.
And I think, for what it's worth, I think a lot of it is around their own jobs. So that sort of initial point of skepticism is, this is what I trained for. It's always been done like this. My job is to do the same old stuff, but 10% faster or 20% faster. And there's that shifting of mindset back to kind of, as you put it, purpose. Why are we here? What is the purpose of this company? What are the jobs to be done? How are we going to execute them? Do we need people or not? And it's that mindset shift we've often found, with us lawyers, who can be very detail minded and risk averse and everything else, that we need to kind of shift. And when you shift the mindset, I think people see it and they see the opportunity as opposed to just a threat.
Yeah, I introduced a lawyer recently to ChatGPT. We put in a lot of case materials, etc., and he was shocked at how effective it was at building a case. And so, I'd encourage knowledge workers to use these technologies and not just be skeptical about them, use them and see for yourself. But I also want to kind of lean into this question of the kind of macro question, which is the scaremongering associated with not having jobs. And as I said, if we play our cards right, if we apply these technologies in the right way over the next several years, decades, you could create a world where people are free to contribute to however they want. Now, people say to me, Daniel, what would I do if I didn't have a job? A job gives me purpose. It's nonsense. I know so many people don't have jobs that have purpose. I think purpose. And there are more people today playing chess than ever before. AIs can play chess better than us. They have been able to play chess better than us for the past 3 decades. It doesn't stop us from playing chess. It doesn't stop us from writing poetry. If we all had a helicopter, we'd all be arguing who leaves first, because time is scarce, space is scarce, mates are scarce, experiences are scarce. There'll always be something that we'll be competing around. It's just, there are so many people that are born at the moment in unnecessary suffering, economically constrained. And what I hope to see is AI freeing people from those economic constraints, freeing people from having to work to just feed themselves and their family, to be able to then use their time and their energy and creativity to contribute to humanity.
Daniel, we've covered a lot of ground. Thank you so much for being on Brief Encounters. Where can folks find out more about your work?
LinkedIn, message me on LinkedIn, email me, daniel@satalia.com. Reach out anytime you want. Very happy to keep the conversation going.
Awesome. Thanks so much again, Daniel.
Thanks, Richard.